Hello and welcome back to another episode of CamBro Conversations. Today's conversation, we are talking about how to become champion-minded. To do so, we are joined by author, speaker, mindset and performance coach, Allistair McCaw. Allistair, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Good to be here, Colin.
Thanks, Allistair. And an eclectic accent you've got, and I think that probably leads me into my first question about where you've come from, where you've been over the years, and bringing the listeners up to speed on what is quite an interesting background.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland, many years ago, probably during the most turbulent times there in the 70s. We emigrated to South Africa in 81. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, so I didn't really remember that much. And I grew up in South Africa. I was educated in South Africa. Obviously, a very sports-minded nation as well. You play a lot of sports at school. I played 7, 8 sports in school. Rugby, soccer, cricket, tennis, cross country, track and field, you name it. The schools in South Africa are really well equipped with sports facilities. They're just like massive academies. So I was very, very fortunate there. Very sporty family. My brothers, I'm the youngest, so always playing sports in the backyard, in the garden, for example. Getting toughened up by my brothers. You couldn't cry and stuff like that. So yep. I think that's where it all started for me. One of my first loves was tennis. Took that up. Unfortunately, it just became too expensive to sustain. 4 boys. Just rackets, strings, shoes. I'd go through shoes every week and a half, 2 weeks. It was just too expensive. So at 14, 15, I took up running because I was pretty good at it in school as well. That came to me, I wouldn't say easily, but I'd love to run. I'd love to train. I became the under 16 national champion on the 5K on the road. When I was 16, I ran, I think a 15:09 for 5K. So I had speed back at that age. Yeah, when I try and break 20 now, it's I just can't believe I used to run 5 minutes quicker for 5 kilometers. That progressed into duathlon, which is triathlon without the swimming. I wasn't a good swimmer, and I had a fairly decent career there as well. I competed in 5 world championships. I was 2 times national champion. I raced for a few European clubs, and so definitely, looking back at it, sports was in my family. The facilities were all there in South Africa. It was for free. And that progressed into, sports opened up a lot of traveling for me to see the world. And that's always something I say to athletes is, it's what a opportunity it is to play sports and travel the world. And that was the beginnings for me.
Yeah, I think one of the key things you mentioned there is about South Africa being such a multi-sport upbringing for you. 7 or 8 sports, I think you said you were playing at school age. That differs greatly to most of the listeners and myself who live in the UK and Scotland, where, you'll probably have you'll have a PE department where you would do a number of different sports during your class time. But ultimately, if you want to do extracurricular sports at a level, it'd be fairly limited. Rugby, football, maybe a push hockey, depending on what school you were at in the public system or the private system. So for you to be immersed in so many at such a young age, how do you think that led to you perhaps being quite a strong athlete?
I think just I've been reading a book. I think it's called, I've got it actually here right now. It's called The Best. I've just finished that book, and it's nothing new that I know. I know that sounds very arrogant, but once you start reading, I read 30 to 40 books a year. So, you start accumulating the same type of topics. But studies show that usually the youngest kid in the family is usually the best athlete because, and they have siblings as well, because, it's a good chance your brother or sister played a sport. My situation, my brothers all did. They're all older than me. Your biggest goal as a kid is to beat your brother in whatever sport it is. So I had to earn that, right? So, I was just looking at that from a scientific point of view. It's usually the youngest sibling in the family that goes on to be the best, not always. in a way that the eldest was used as a guinea pig, or the parents made all the mistakes on the oldest one and improved it for the next one along. So I think that was an advantage to me. Always someone to play sports with in the backyard at home. My brothers, you'd finish school at 1 o'clock in South Africa, and you'd stay there till sundown at 6-7 p.m. just playing a pile of sports. And like I said, they were for free, and all the facilities were free, and all the equipment was passed on to you. So we were given a massive advantage. Of course, I didn't know what it was like in the rest of the world. You just think when you're young that it's normal. And then I realized it's not normal, for all the things we've got. I mean, our school, which was just a public school, I didn't go to any fancy private school or anything like that. We had an Olympic pool. We had 4 hockey fields, 3 rugby fields. I mean, 16 tennis courts. That's a public school.
Yeah, heavily resourced and invested in from a young
That's
age.
what I say. It's like a sports academy that we would go to, and that was normal. I don't know how it is now. I mean, I haven't been, I've only been back to South Africa 2 or 3 times since 2000, but that's how it was back in the 80s, 90s.
Yeah, incredible. And it's interesting you make that point about the younger sibling to drive them on. I've got a very close relationship with my younger brother, and I certainly know that he started golf at a younger age because I was at the golf club, so it was okay for him to come along. So he was hitting balls at 8 rather than 10 or 12. So automatically he was developing at a faster rate. The same for rugby, the same for the gym as well. When we both started lifting weights, he could come along because I was over 16. And as long as I was with him, he could come along and follow our sessions. So that's a funny point that you raised, and certainly one that anecdotally strikes home with me.
So, yeah, I mean, if I ask, sorry, Colin, when I ask like the athletes I've worked with, I'm very curious about their background as well. And, for example, the Grinham sisters, Natalie and Rachel, they were number 1 and 2 in the world in squash about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I think Rachel still plays. They're phenomenal. And they're Australian Commonwealth gold medalists, both of them. But, I would ask, Natalie and Rachel, who I worked with Natalie, how it started for them. And they would say, yeah, just as kids, my parents played squash. We'd hang around the squash court all day. When they'd go off the court to have a drink, we'd sneak on and hit balls against the wall. And it's so it's very important environment. The environment you're in is key. And obviously as a kid, you don't really choose your environment, where you're born or where you live or what facilities are there. You look at the Andy Murray and Jamie, they grew up next door to a tennis club. So you'll usually find that athletes have come from an environment where parents played or siblings did, or they were next to a facility.
Yeah, that ease of access and environment playing a massive role at a very young age.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about the 10,000 hour rule, but good gosh, I probably piled up 10,000 hours of sports before I was 10. So, they talk about this 10,000 hours of training and so on and so forth. But, if you have to count up all the hours that were not structured training or with a coach or with a team, probably double that the time you would spend in the backyard playing cricket and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And within your own athletic career, this tennis was the focus, then it became running. Tennis is an affordability piece. Is that something that was a challenge in South Africa? I know it's definitely still an expensive sport in the UK. I think Andy Murray would have received a lot of support from the LTA and maybe on scholarships to, I think, Spain or something like that. Andy would have gone to, but it certainly seems that that's a challenging sport versus running, where really your only handicap is time, I suppose.
Yeah, for a game like a sport like tennis, I hardly know of any players that came from a poor background who've made it to the top. It is a privileged sport. Andy and Jamie, Judy, who I know well. We actually had dinner at the Cromlix last time I was in Scotland, which was last February. She was a coach and she was involved with Tennis Scotland. So, there was a background as well. That they had facilities and they had access to these things. Of course, you can't take away Andy and Jamie's passion because they're still playing today. So we talk about, you had the facilities, you had all the opportunities, but you got to have passion. You've got to have, you got to love it if you're going to succeed at it. You can't, push someone to do something they don't want to do. But yes, A sport like tennis and golf, it's very, very rare you'll find someone coming from a poor background.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the best golfers I played with as a junior had some funding from the Scottish Golf Union for coaching and for clubs, etc. But the biggest challenge was for him to get from his house to the different courses and the competitions, because he would need his mum to run him around and stuff like that. So it isn't even just the paying for the tuition or paying for the equipment. It's actually the travel and the expense of that too, Alistair. So it's interesting that you raised those points. So this sports career of yours, you're pushing along with the athletics, you're getting a lot of travel, you're getting to see the world, which is obviously a massive thing for you. How do you then segue into coaching? How does the pursuit of your athletic excellence come to an end?
Yeah, well, I started doing jobs at a very young age. I mean, newspaper routes at 10 years old, and flipping burgers at a takeout at 14, and working in, I did multiple jobs. I was a mascot for a soft drinks company, all these things. So a waiter in a restaurant. So from a young age, I was working to get my pocket money and pay for my sports. Like I said, we didn't have money in the family just to pay for everybody's sports and stuff. I joined. Did I join? No, I started working in a gym, cleaning the restrooms and vacuuming the floors and stuff late at night to be able to train there for free. So that was a bit of a deal, a bargain. So I could get stronger for my sport. Then I became a fitness instructor because it was flexible hours. I could work half day and then train the rest of the rest of the day. Then that progressed into personal training, where all this time I was competing, but it's a sport that doesn't make you a lot of money. Even if you are one of the best in the world, you're still not breaking even with traveling and so on, injuries. So yeah, working that's how I got into really the sports industry. Personal training was to supplement my professional sports side. I enjoyed it. I progressed to work with a lot of top South African sports stars and celebrities and so on. And then in 2000, I decided to move to the Netherlands. And I worked for the Dutch Cricket Federation when they were preparing for the World Cup, and then went to the Dutch Tennis Federation for a short period, and then worked with a whole lot of great squash players and athletes in Amsterdam for a few years. So yeah, that's a little bit of my path.
At that point, was it purely the physical side of things that you were helping with because you were coming from that personal training background? Were you supporting them their strength and conditioning?
Yeah, it was, but I've always been into the mindset and motivation and positivity and so on and so forth. So that was a massive part of it. I was on a call to Croatia yesterday, and talking to a lot of trainers, and I said, people don't come to you for your exercises; they come to you for your energy. And that people have a choice of which trainers or coaches or whatever they want to go to. They'll go to the ones that make them feel good, the ones that that good old saying, it's, you won't remember what people say, but you'll remember how they made you feel. And that's a massive thing in coaching and leadership and whatever it is that it's your energy you bring to people. It's not necessarily, yes, you've got to have skills, you've got to have confidence, of course, that's the entry ticket. But definitely your attitude and your energy is a massive reason why people come to you.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's evident in business, in sport, in coaching, in every area. People buy from people, people relate to people, and they're going to respond much, much better based on that. And you're going down this path. You are pursuing coaching with these top level teams, these athletes in South Africa, and then in multiple different sports as well, which I think is an interesting point that I'd love to understand more about. When it comes to coaching, maybe cricketers versus a squash player, what were some of the main differences in that early part of your career where you're really cutting your teeth at the kind of top level coaching?
I just had a really thirst and hunger to learn and understand more, and I'd like to experiment of taking certain things from one sport and trying it in another in terms of movements or things like that. So I was very experimental. Always learning, always reading from a young age. I have this photo of when I was like 6 or 7. I'm in my dungarees and I'm reading a book, and I think it just from a very young age, I don't know, maybe we couldn't afford a TV, I don't know, but we just had a lot of books. And so for me, it was always learning. And I just love different sports. You know, I never wanted to specialize in one. Obviously, tennis, I was able to work with a lot of great players and top 10 in the world and so on. But, you know, the transfer of like squash to tennis and the certain movements and certain patterns were very similar as well. So, yeah, I think that's what maybe made me successful as a sports performance coach in my previous career, was people enjoyed working with me because of, I think, my energy, and also because I was very curious. I was very creative. You know, they were just weren't getting the same stuff all the time. They knew I was always investing in myself and learning. And this is a message I pass on to trainers and people today, is keep investing in yourself, keep learning. You know, your clients will have no problem if you're away for a weekend, a month, because you're investing in yourself and, you know, you're learning. You know, they'll realize that you're making yourself better so you can make them better.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's that whole famous phrase that sometimes it's better to take a break from trying to chop down the tree to sharpen the axe, rather than just blindly falling on and chopping away. Whereas if you take that time to sharpen up your skills, improve your skills, and likewise, if you're coaching across multiple sports and multiple modalities, your ability and curiosity, Allistair, to ask questions and learn about it would get a far better result from the athlete, rather than you maybe having one particular bias to, all my athletes will do this program, regardless of whether it's a hip hinge dominant sport or whether it's one that's more upper body focused, whatever the style of training would need to be. So I find that very, very interesting that your curiosity is kind of paid off across that. And I guess athletes respect the fact that you're not maybe telling them that you know everything about their particular sport.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was like that in the early stages of my career. You know, when you're in your 20s, you think you do know it all, and you're actually afraid to ask, because then, you know, you might be seen as incompetent. But the older I got, the more I involved the athlete in decision making and asking them what they thought. And I think if I can pass on some advice, if there's trainers out there or coaches, is really include your athlete, include them in the dialogue, in the decision making. Don't be the one that's just, you know, dishing out orders, and, you know, get their opinion. A lot of the times they can come back with something that can give you food for thought and change your mind about something. You know, when you involve them as part of the process and part of the decision making, they take more ownership of that. So, you know, I think that's something that I learned as I went along, is don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask the athlete what they think. Or, you know, a lot of athletes can do a lot of things better than we can as coaches, in terms of, because they've seen a lot of things as well from previous coaches and so on. We need to remember that they do have a data bank of information as well. So, you know, that's important to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Respect their knowledge and their experience, and combine it with yours across multiple different sports, and you can achieve a lot with them. Given that you coached across, for a sports performance perspective anyway, across both individual and team sports, what was the difference that you would see in terms of your coaching? How would you have to mix it up for, say, an individual versus if you were coaching a team of athletes or a team of sports people?
Yeah, definitely. You know, working with an individual has its pros and cons. You know, you can get sick of each other if you're traveling or full time with each other. It's like any other relationship. But, you know, it's easier to connect and know. A team, on the other hand, is a group of individuals that have come together. So teams take longer to form relationships and trust with individuals. I'm not going to say you're going to be liked by everybody, so you've got to get over that hurdle, but you've definitely got to learn how to adapt and to build relationships with the individuals within the team. That's critical as well if you're going to earn the trust of the team. So yeah, that's the biggest difference. I'd say it takes longer with the team, you know, because obviously if you're working with an individual, you'll have dinner with them and you'll travel with them possibly, and, you know, you're at the tournament and practice with them and so on and so forth. So you're spending a lot of time together. With a team, it's different. You're only probably spending time with them when there's team practices and so on, unless you do travel with the team. So Yeah, it takes more time in a team environment.
Yeah. What are some of the strategies that you would use with a team rather than the individual? You mentioned they're going for dinner with individuals and getting that closer bond. How would you try and replicate that connection and trust with a team?
To get trust, you've got to give trust. So, you've got to show you're putting your trust in the team members before you even know them. Why should they trust you if you're not showing your trust in them, first of all? So I think that's one of the most important things to start with, is that I think also vulnerability is a huge one, is that they might not know you, but the more you can share about yourself and your shortcomings and your things in life as well, that they get to know that you're a human being, that you make mistakes too, that you're not just all about ego. I think you become more approachable as that type of person. People are more inspired by our ability to overcome imperfections than our perfections, and standing up there and saying, look what I did. And, all that, people aren't really, they might be impressed, but, people are inspired by the human behind you. So I think the human connection is very important. Working with a team that you share about yourself, and of course that you give them trust first if you want the trust back.
I find that an incredibly interesting point you raise about vulnerability, Alistair, because like you say, you could always hold yourself up as this expert, particularly given your experience level now. You could hold yourself up as the man that has all the answers, but then some of the team members might not respond well to you because they maybe feel like they're being lectured. And if there's one thing that I know when it comes to conversation skills and networking in business and in life, just lecturing and speaking at somebody never ever registers. Is one of the few things that people come away with like a negative dopamine response from a conversation, where they feel that they've been talked at the whole time. And I certainly can understand that your ability to maybe share some imperfections, share some things that you're not perfect at and things that you're working on yourself, would enable me to connect much better with whoever was teaching me or coaching me.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think, if I can add in there, sense of humor is very important as well. If you think back to the coaches that you enjoyed in your life, or teachers, they're usually people that had a sense of humor. You have a laugh. And I think that's another area where people enjoy you. Look, if you're walking into a big club, they know you have the skills, because again, the skills and competence are the entry ticket to these places. So they're not questioning so much your skills and your competence. They're questioning more your character. They're questioning more your trust factor. That's what they're, why should I trust you? Even though you have a nice resume and you worked with a big club before, whatever it may be. So those take time. But yeah, a sense of humor is very, very underrated in coaching and leadership. We enjoy to be around fun people. We enjoy to have a laugh. Obviously, you've got to be very careful what your sense of humor is like. I'm almost finished my 5th book, which is on leadership and coaching. And I know you would enjoy this book as well, Colin. A lot of us know how to coach. We know the X's and O's. We know how to put a program together, but do we know how to lead people? So there's a lot of great coaches out there, but not so much great leaders. And there's a big difference. Being a coach doesn't automatically make you a leader. So, there's a part in that book about sense of humor, lead with humor. And we've got to be careful of the type of humor we use. I know you guys in the UK, they like to use the word banter. Yep. But banter can become, it can step over the line.
Bullying.
Having a laugh at the expense of somebody else, especially in a team environment, something that can be personal. Sarcasm is also not a form of sense of humor. It's probably the lowest form of sense of humor. If you know that person, or, then it's different. Sarcasm is okay, but generally, you've got to be careful of being too sarcastic, especially working with females, with girls. If you're sarcastic, they don't take it as well as the males do. So, that's another area we could spend a lot of time talking about, is the difference between coaching male and females. So
what are some of those other differences then, in terms of maybe their sense of humor versus a male's is different? What are some of the other key areas that you've noticed, Alistair?
Yeah, obviously, you've got to understand the female, their cycle as well of what they're experiencing that week. They're maybe not going to be as maybe might be a bit more fatigued. So you've got to take all these elements into account. Females prefer to be praised in person than in a group, for example. Guys like to be praised in a group because we like to feel good about ourselves.
That's the ego there, Alistair, isn't it? That's the ego.
Exactly. Girls, on the other hand, rather prefer that you tell them and instead of tell the whole group, for example. So those are some examples. And talking about ego, I had Martin Boucher on the podcast about 2 weeks ago on Champion Minded, talking about his new book coming out on ego. So just for your listeners there, I don't know when this is coming out, and the book actually hasn't come out yet, but it's called E-Goals, E-G-O-A-L-S, E-Goals. And, Martin has worked with Zlatan and Cavani, and, he's been at Paris Saint-Germain for 6 years, and he's got some fantastic stories in there. They sent me a PDF copy of it. I contributed some to the book as well of my experiences and ego in the sports industry, not just athletes, coaches, and this is something I do, is I go into teams as a leadership consultant and culture consultant and work with coaches because there's a lot of ego there. The bigger the club, the bigger the ego.
Yeah, you mentioned PSG there. I know that's a club that you've done some work with before. Was it a club that had problems with ego?
Every club has problems with ego. It's a human thing. Even at grassroots level, at your local club down the road, there's egos there. People's, especially in coaching, where there might be a difference of opinion in terms of what your team is going to be for Saturday or your strategy. And then, you have a clash with your assistant because they think it should be this way. Those are egos working as well. So yeah, it's a really good book. It's really, really timely as well. It's a book that, Martin says as well, he wished he had 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I can imagine that ego links into an ability to use humor as well, because you maybe find that certain people, if their ego is inflated, that they would struggle to have, I know we spoke about banter sometimes being a risky area, but jokes back and forth with one another, because the ego would maybe, the kind of biggest ego in the room would maybe say that no humor could come back their way. And you triggered the thought in my head, Alistair, where you were speaking about coaches I enjoyed when I was younger. A lot of them were a little bit self-depreciating, particularly when they were coaching really good players who were maybe more talented at that age than they'd ever been. And their ability to kind of maybe joke about their ability to perform a skill that they were trying to teach you, but ultimately trying to still reinforce the methodology. And you could take them seriously because their vulnerability and all their flaws were there, and they were making fun of it, so to speak, but still from a credible space where you take them seriously.
It just reminds me of a professional tennis player I was working with, and I was with their coach, and he was a former top 20 player in the world. I mean, he's beaten Federer, he's beaten Novak, he's beaten Andy, and he was ridiculously talent. I don't like the word talent because you got to work for talent, but he's ridiculously skilled, good hands, could come up with incredible shots that other top players couldn't. And he was trying to, first of all, he told the player, I'd like you to do this when this particular ball comes. And the player just couldn't do it. And he was getting frustrated, like, why, it's so easy. You just do this, and he'd show him. But the player couldn't do this. And I could see like frustration building up in both of them because the player felt a little bit embarrassed. The coach thought, I just can't understand why you can't do this. And, I had to obviously bide my time and know when the right time was to step in and chat to the coach away from the player and just say, look, you had incredible talents and things that other players just couldn't do. And he'd say, yeah, but he's a professional player and he's in the top 100 in the world. And I said, yeah. And that's how ridiculously good skills you had then as well. But, other players don't have those and probably will never have those. So, we've got to understand what the athlete has and what they don't have.
I think that maybe links into why many very, very talented football players don't always make the best managers, because they can't quite understand why players can't perform at the level they played at. They maybe can't come up with those iconic moments or passes under pressure or shots under pressure that they maybe could, in the same way that this tennis coach who had, like you say, supreme skills under pressure, but his athlete that he was coaching, albeit a top level athlete, didn't have that in their locker. Whereas many top footballers, even if you're coaching at the top clubs, may not replicate the kind of some of the managers that have come in and tried to pass that on.
Yeah, no, exactly. You know, we're all different. We all come from a different skill set. We all come from a different mentality. We've all been coached differently, you know, with different coaches throughout our development phase. So, you know, there's so many things that you have to take into consideration. You know, especially working with young athletes as well. You know, you got to take all these factors into consideration.
From a selfish perspective, Allistair, I know we're both big Rangers fans. I know that you did some work with them in the last 18 months, and it's obviously been an incredible season for Rangers, just finished there. What were some of the things that you focused on with that team, who were clearly talented, but perhaps mentally were lacking, and they kind of fell away at the crucial time in 2 seasons in a row before finally getting over the line with Gerrard?
Well, obviously they've got an exceptional leader in Stephen. I mean, you know, he was the captain of England. Obviously, he was the captain of Liverpool for a long time. You know, he's another great example of a quiet leader. You know, leader, you don't have to be the loudest or the most vocal. You know, I think a lot of the times coaches feel their captain and their team should be the most vocal or, you know, loudest. Not necessarily. You know, Stephen's leadership skills come down to his example, which is the most powerful form of leadership. And, you know, he does that very well. He's, like I said, he's not a man of many words. He's also got the right people around him, you know, Michael Beale and Gary McAllister and Jordan Milsom. You know, he's that's what a great leader does as well, is they surround themselves with the best people as well. And people that supplement the things that they maybe lack. For example, you know, it's finding someone similar to you is not always the best idea in leadership. This is the advice I give to coaches is, you know, find an assistant coach or people around you that are better than you in certain areas as well. So yeah, that's one thing. You know, I've not worked with the players at Rangers. I don't do that. I don't go in and work with players in these clubs. I work with the coaching team, the staff, the performance team. So, you know, and you see good clubs like Paris Saint-Germain and Glasgow Rangers have had success in the last two to 3 years, be it Champions League or be it Europa or your Premiership. There is that they invest in their people, they invest in their coaches, they bring people like myself in and to work with the team, you know. So those are areas that the fans maybe don't see. But you see that these clubs that excel, like Liverpool and so on, they resource a lot of outside help as well, behind the scenes, and that's why they're world class.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. There's so many different directions I could go with that, but you mentioned about Steven Gerrard building this team around him, and as good leaders do, finding people who supplement areas that they're not at their strongest, an ability to bring those people together and build something that's really, really strong as a collective rather than just the front man. From an outsider's perspective, it looks like that's maybe one of the main differences between two people who were compared constantly throughout their playing career, but also now in their management career, Gerrard and Lampard, who Lampard appears to very much be the face and everything else behind what he was doing at Derby and Chelsea, whereas Gerrard, I think every Rangers fan knows, is very reliant on Michael Beale for tactics, Gary McAllister for that knowledge of Scottish football and that Rangers culture, and then Jordan Milsom for the fitness side of things, Tom Culshaw, who's the kind of the set piece man, and there's an appreciation that it is a team, whereas with Lampard, you maybe just assume that he's a persona and a person in his own right.
Yeah, I think with Lampard, you know, too soon. Also, you know, we know the board there as well, that, you know, one bad season, even half a bad season as Lampard had, you're out. So, you know, listen, you can't blame him for taking the job. I mean, who's going to turn down, you know, the Chelsea manager position? So you can't blame him for that. All of us would have done that in his shoes, even if you feel you're ready or not yourself, you know. but it was just too soon. He hasn't gathered up enough experience. I think he's going to be a fantastic coach. I think he will be the England coach one day. He's good with people. He's good with players. I just think he needs more of the coaching skill set of learning to be a coach. So, and that takes years. That takes years of experience, even though he was a player. I think he was also given the Chelsea job because of not his coaching background, because of Lampard, Chelsea, and the legend that he's been at the club. So the fans loved it. It's the dream situation. You come back and coach your team. Gerrard, Liverpool, maybe next. Who knows? But unfortunately, it just didn't work.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raised that coaching thing, and I guess if Lampard could find assistants and coaches around him that would help bring that on in the medium term while he built up that experience, that would be fantastic. Given that you have an affiliation with Rangers and then most of the other things that you've dealt with have been purely professional, how did you strike the balance between the two? Because obviously there maybe be even more of a burning passion to make sure that that worked versus all your other areas where, of course, you wanted to go well, but with Rangers, obviously, you were maybe even a bit more hyped up, given that you were born in Belfast, raised a Rangers supporter.
Yeah, I mean, and this might come as a surprise to Rangers supporters, but I don't mind Celtic either. I don't mind any of these clubs. I've never had a hate for any opposition. I'm a massive Liverpool supporter. I don't mind Manchester United at all. I just find some people it's sports, I mean, they just take it too far. I love Alex Ferguson. He's probably one of my top 3 favorite leaders. And he was at our rival club, if we want to call that. But Brendan Rodgers at Celtic did a fantastic job. Celtic have had some great players and success as well. So, honestly, even if they knocked my door, and this sounds like a bad thing, I would help. I really just don't have in my line of work, you can't take sides, because I work with large universities here in America who I consult them, but they're competing against each other on Saturday. So, in my line of work, there's a lot of privacy. You're not telling the next club what the previous one is doing and so on and so forth. Otherwise I'd be out of a job. So your privacy is very important. In this job. But yeah, for sure, it was a great thrill to walk through the gates at Rangers and at the training ground. Because as a kid, I grew up watching Ali McCoist and Goff and Gascoigne and so on at Rangers. Just such a legacy. Michael, was it Michael Laudrup, or it was Michael Laudrup? Brian, sorry. Just those legends of the game as well. So yeah, a lot of history going back to Rangers, and it was a great joy to do some work with them. And behind me here, I've got a nice signed Rangers jersey. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that professionalism piece is really refreshing, and it gives reassurance to every company that you'll probably work for. I know you would do some Fortune 500 company work, you do some university work as well. So quite refreshing to hear that element of professionalism. The last big area that I'd love to dive into with Allistair is around being champion-minded. That's one of your most well-known books. It's the title of your podcast. What are the key elements of champion-minded that you think the kind of demographic of listener that I've got, who are young professionals wanting to excel in business, wanting to excel in their career, wanting to excel in fitness, that they could maybe implement in their day-to-day life that you instill in athletes?
I think being champion-minded comes down to maximizing your potential. And what does that mean? We've all come from different backgrounds. Some of us have been more privileged than others, and so on and so forth. But here we are today. You have a choice of where you're going to go from today. I believe if you really want to make something happen, you can make it happen. You will find a way, be it through people, through, I've had to travel a lot. I've had to give up a lot of Christmases, birthdays, weddings, so on and so forth, because of my career and because of my job. But that was a choice I made. I don't like to use the word sacrifice, because I prefer to use the word choice. It was my choice to be away from those events. It's my choice to be on the other side of the world, staying in somebody's attic or garage, slumming it out because of what I wanted to achieve. When I was competing, I couldn't afford hotels and so on and so forth. I'd be sleeping on people's couches, and and doing all these things. So, but because I wanted it so badly. So, you can't give that to anybody, but that champion minded is about maximizing what you have, making things happen, getting up each day, having a plan to your day, being structured, chasing your goals, and just maximizing everything you've got. We all can make those choices.
I've been asked a few times through Instagram, Alistair, what my biggest fear is. And I always come back to not attempting to maximize my potential. I have no idea what that potential might be in whatever area of life it is, whether it's fitness or golf or business development or self-development. If I don't work towards that, then I feel a little bit worried and a bit disappointed in what I could potentially become. And that's why I really enjoyed diving into some of your content. And I know you were speaking about one of the elements of champion minded being how we look. And that was one that stood out to me, being quite something that quite a lot of people maybe underestimate. What did you mean when it came to how I look can lead to me being champion?
Yeah, now, yeah, exactly. This is something where, people can misread it. Look, human beings are very judgmental. When somebody walks through the door, in 7 seconds, you've built up this thought system of, do I trust them? Do they look confident? Are they, you can already just build up something within your head. We're very judgmental without even being able to control it. It's the first thing we think. Someone that's intimidating, that looks intimidating, we fear, we can fear that, for example. So, we're judging on their appearance. But very important is to look professional in whatever job that you're doing. For example, dress for the occasion, look respectable. It doesn't require money or wearing the best clothes or whatever, but look professional, present yourself to the best you can. And, like John Wooden of UCLA and all these famous coaches or from the yesterday, Alex Ferguson as well, the team would wear suits and blazers and so on and so forth when they'd go to travel, for example. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from there, is look professional. Look the part, because people are very judgmental in terms of how you look. And you might say, well, I don't care. Well, then you're basically jeopardizing your own pathway to climbing the ladder, so to say, in your business. I wouldn't hire someone that doesn't present themselves well.
Yeah, I mean, you're completely preaching to the converted here, Alistair. I think that how we present ourselves is massively important, and even how we hold ourselves in terms of body language as well, because I know that plays a role in things that you've discussed
Exactly.
as well. Because if you go in, you could have a nice shirt and trousers on, but if you're slouched over, then you diminish that impact of that as well. And you could have the nice shirt and the nice trousers on, but it might be untucked and unbuttoned, and it might look unpresentable, and straight away you've diminished that as well, because you've lost that element of being tidy and well presented. It could be the most expensive designer shirt on the rack in the shop, but if you've not tucked it in, it's not ironed, then you've lost some bonus points there.
Yeah, if I can give a little secret, a little tip I do, if I'm working with a club, or I'm working with a team, and some of them will give you attire, they'll give you shirts and whatever. But if they don't, let's just say it's a first visit, I'll usually wear the same color shirt or tie of the team, so there's a bit of a connection there, because you could be sitting there. Let's just say I go to Rangers and I'm wearing a green tie and whatever. There's already like a unsaid psychological barrier there in terms that you're so I always try and dress for the occasion of where I'm going, and I'm very mindful of that, because it's just one of the things I believe.
It's really powerful, isn't it? How a little bit of perception, a little bit of homework can make those around you feel more comfortable when you go into the area. I recently moved from working in the corporate insurance world, where it was always shirts, ties, blue suit, black shoes, going out to clients and shaking hands and whatnot, to an area where I deal a lot with student accommodation managers, so people that manage big purpose-built blocks, areas of flats. And if you turned up in a suit, you would be massively overdressed, because you're sometimes going out to building sites where they're going to refurbish it. So but equally, I don't want to turn up in a pair of jeans and a pair of trainers, because that's too disrespectful. So striking the balance in being well presented, but not necessarily being overdressed, I think has been a big thing as well. But I'll certainly take into account that kind of color scheme. That's an interesting one, Alistair. I'll research what their brand colors are. And that links into one of the things that you said as well around preparation with champion mindedness. And that really, really hit home with me, because I'm at my most confident when I feel well prepared. So for example, to speak to somebody of your ilk and with your experience, I wanted to be aware of the things that you've achieved, the things that you've done, so that I can understand and ask you pertinent questions to get the most interesting insights from you. How do you think athletes can prepare better for performance, or even people in my line of work prepare better for what we do?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I believe it's very important that you have structure to your day, you have a plan to your day. So like every evening, the last thing I do in the office here is look at my next day in terms of, what I have lined up, my schedule and so on and so forth. There's time for exercise, there's time for the things that I need to do as well. So, that would be one area, is be organized, be prepared, have structure to your day. Free time, read about your industry, bios, whatever it may be. There's so much information out there. Just keep learning as much as you can. Those are the people that get ahead, is the ones with a wealth of information. And like I said, these days we have so many resources. When I was in my early 20s, there wasn't internet and so on. So you just couldn't just go and find something pretty quickly, or have access to, like we do today, people on calls like this, where you could just call someone that's been in the industry for 25 years and have a conversation with them, or listen to them on a podcast. Today, we can just listen to anybody at any time. So, today's easier and easier. The biggest challenge today is not the amount of information. It's sifting through the right information, or gaining the right knowledge. There's a lot of, anybody can be an expert out there these days. They brand themselves well. They maybe have good marketing. They have a good video producer that puts their stuff together, and we can be fooled by that. So it's very important that you look into the background of the person that you're learning from. Are they the real deal? Have they worked in the trenches? Have they done their bit? That's very important, because like I said, today people can easily brand themselves as an expert.
It's very, very true. And it's interesting you say we're drowning in information, but we need to be super selective of what we take in. And I know you're saying you're reading 30, 40 books a year, but you're probably being quite ruthless with the ones that you're choosing. And there's probably some that you read through, like you say, there'll be echoes of different themes that come through in each one. And there'll be ones where you think, right, okay, well, I've maybe learned as much as I can from this book. I need to be reading something else or something different. And the last thing I would say when it comes to all this information is free. This knowledge is free, but our attention is probably the hardest thing, particularly when we've got so many distractions, Alistair, and we're thinking about being as prepared as possible and being ready for and knowledgeable about what we're going to do. We often get distracted by things like social media or whatever's on Netflix or the television, rather than investing in a little bit of preparation time, which can often make us feel a bit more confident.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been distraction, I suppose, and we have a choice if we, have our phone in the hand when we're speaking to somebody or not, or on the table, which is another one. I'm very conscious of that as well. If I'll either have my phone on the seat next to me or face down, but it's just think about when you're speaking to someone and their phone is on the table, it's face up, and the thing flashes, and they look at it, and they, you don't feel connected. You don't feel they're listening. So, I think that's just one area where you could, if you want to be more mindful, if you want to be more present, that's maybe an area you could start is develop the habit of, putting your phone face down or putting it away when you're at dinner with somebody or in a meeting, and not having it, because basically what that person's saying to you is that my phone is more important than my conversation with you right now. Yeah. And, I've had meetings where the person has had a phone in front of them, and, it flashes every 2 minutes, and they look and they're distracted, and you just know they're not there,
It really breaks our focus as well, because these things are far more cleverly designed than our brains have evolved to keep up with the distraction and the dopamine and everything that we're getting from them. And I'm a big fan of having my personal phone outside the room when I'm working 9 till 12, really, and I have like just an undisturbed 3 hour block where, unless my mom or my brother or my dad or somebody phones me and it's an emergency, I'm not going to be going through to that room to check WhatsApp or Instagram or whatever else is going on in the world. And I guess the last area, and it kind of touches on a lot of that, is around communication. Allistair, how do you think we can communicate better to be more champion-minded?
Listen better. Great coaches, great leaders are great listeners. So I think listening more, we learn more. When we're talking, we're just telling things we already know or think we know. But I think listening is the best form of communication. When you really deeply listen, like I said, what changed in my coaching was getting more of the athlete's opinion, listening to the athlete more than just telling him or her what to do. Because I was brought up like that. I was coached like that in school. They would just tell you what to do and you didn't question it. You did it. These days, this generation is very different. You have to be in dialogue with them. So listening to the athlete, asking them what they think, communicate clearly. When I work with companies, communication is probably the first thing we go into. Is how do we communicate here? What's our mediums? WhatsApp, text, email. How do we email? How do little simple things like getting to the subject as soon as you can in an email. Don't blab on about your weekend and so on and so forth. People don't have time to read through that. Be very polite. Get to the point. Your last line should be, I would appreciate a reply by the end of the day, please, if possible, or by tomorrow. So get to your point. Have an action point there as well, as that, because if you just write an email, talking about needing 15 books, but you don't ask by when or how or whatever, that person might go, well, that's not important, so I leave it. And there you are waiting, and you're checking your emails the next day, and the person still hasn't got back to you, but they don't know. They're like, no, it's not important. We'll do it on Friday, or we'll do it next Monday. So yeah, be very, very clear of what your expectations are in your communication. I think that is something that can help you a long way. When I write an email, I always ask for, appreciate a reply within the day or the day after, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. That clarity of message makes us so much more efficient, both in whatever we're trying to achieve, whether that's in fitness or in business, Allistair. So a great note for us to wrap up on. And the last thing to ask you is, where's the best place for people to connect with you off the back of this? You mentioned the Champion Minded podcast. That'll be linked in the show notes. I'm looking forward to hearing the episode on Eagles, but where else can people find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm very active on Twitter at Allistair McCaw, on Instagram, Be Champion Minded, and Facebook, Allistair McCaw page. And like you said there, yeah, the podcasts are available on iTunes and YouTube and Amazon podcasts, and via my website, allistairmccaw.com. And of course, all books are available on Amazon.
Perfect, Allistair. Those will be linked in the show notes below. Thanks again to everyone for listening. If you think you would like to become more champion-minded and share this with the people around you, take a screenshot, pop it in your Instagram story, tag me at call.cambro, or ping the link onto a friend to get them involved in the conversation. And I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.